The video that shocked millions began with chaos in the sky. A black woman, handcuffed, thrown from a police helicopter spiraling toward the ground with nothing to break her fall. It sounds impossible, like something torn from an action movie or an exaggerated headline. But the story that unfolded afterward was far more complicated and revealing than anyone expected. What happened that day exposed not only flaws in tactical decision-making, but also the haunting truth about what happens when human judgment collides with adrenaline, power, and fear. The scene began during a high-stakes police operation. Law enforcement had been pursuing a suspect involved in a series of violent robberies. The suspect, according to official statements, was believed to be armed and dangerous. When the chase reached a remote area, ground pursuit became nearly impossible, forcing police to use a helicopter for aerial tracking. Inside that helicopter were two officers, a pilot, and an unexpected detainee, a black woman who had been taken into custody earlier during the same operation for allegedly aiding the suspect. Witnesses described seeing her handcuffed, terrified, and pleading for her life as the rotor blades thundered overhead. What happened next would change the entire tone of the mission. At approximately 3,000 feet, something went wrong. The helicopter's side door was opened mid-flight, and within moments, the woman was ejected. Whether accidentally or deliberately became the core of the investigation. The horrifying footage captured from below shows her tumbling helplessly through the air. It spread online within hours, sparking outrage and disbelief across the nation. But what was even more confounding was what followed. Authorities initially remained silent, offering only vague statements about an operational mishap, but soon the truth began to surface. Through leaks and eyewitness reports, the central claim was that one of the armed officers inside the helicopter had made a critical error. The mission was supposed to involve deploying a tactical agent equipped with a parachute to track the fleeing suspect from above. However, due to what some insiders called a fatal miscommunication, the woman was mistaken for the officer who was supposed to perform the drop. The chaos, confusion, and noise inside the helicopter added to the tragedy. The woman wasn't wearing tactical gear or any safety harness, just handcuffs. Yet someone allegedly shouted, "Drop her now!" And within seconds, she was gone. In the aftermath, the investigation uncovered disturbing procedural flaws. Reports indicated that the helicopter's internal restraint system was malfunctioning, meaning detainees weren't properly secured. Standard operating protocol dictates that any detained individual must be restrained in a fixed seat with a belt lock that can withstand aerial turbulence. But investigators found that the model of helicopter used, a Bell 407, had a faulty restraint bracket that had been flagged for replacement months prior. The department had ignored the maintenance recommendation, citing budget constraints. That small oversight, combined with poor communication, became the deadly formula that ended a life in the most horrifying way imaginable. Then came the twist, the phrase that made headlines everywhere: "Armed officer don't need parachute." That chilling line came from leaked audio recorded moments after the incident. When the crew realized what had happened, one officer muttered those words in disbelief, implying that the person who had been dropped wasn't the tactical operative at all. The intended jumper, a trained officer wearing an integrated parachute system, had been sitting behind them, preparing for a controlled descent. The one they threw wasn't armed, wasn't trained, and wasn't even supposed to be there. From a procedural standpoint, experts began dissecting every layer of the event. Aviation analysts pointed out that the helicopter's door mechanisms required deliberate manual release, meaning the drop couldn't have been purely accidental. You can't just fall out of a police helicopter unless the crew intentionally opens the side latch. Furthermore, the operational design of most law enforcement aircraft includes a safety interlock system to prevent mid-air door releases without pilot authorization. That raised the question, how did the door open, and who gave the command? Performance-wise, the Bell 407 is known for stability, especially at low altitudes. It can maintain a hover at around 2,000 to 3,000 feet without turbulence-induced danger. The internal cabin is designed to accommodate surveillance gear, tactical units, and occasionally detainees. But that dual-purpose nature is precisely what made it risky for this kind of mission. It wasn't built for prisoner transport during active pursuit operations. Critics argue that using such a machine for both aerial pursuit and detainment is like mixing two incompatible systems, one for combat mobility and one for human custody. That design flaw isn't the manufacturer's fault, but rather a reflection of how law enforcement adapted equipment beyond its intended scope. The social response was immediate and fierce. The footage went viral within hours, circulating on social media with captions demanding justice and accountability. Activists pointed to the racial aspect, how a black woman in custody could be treated so recklessly, even dehumanized to the point of being mistaken for expendable equipment. Demonstrations erupted outside police stations and calls for reform spread nationwide. The department's initial response was a mix of defensiveness and denial. Officials claimed it was an unprecedented operational error, yet failed to address how a restrained detainee ended up airborne. The technical report released weeks later didn't help their case. It confirmed that the detainee's restraints were intact before ejection, meaning she was physically bound when thrown out. That alone contradicted earlier claims of accidental release. Additionally, black box data from the helicopter indicated that the pilot's command module registered an open-door sequence, which must be manually triggered by either the crew or an override switch. This pointed again to deliberate human action, not mere mechanical failure. Inside police culture, a storm was brewing. Whistleblowers claimed that the mission briefing that morning had been rushed. The tactical officer assigned to the airborne descent had reportedly protested that the helicopter wasn't equipped with proper deployment protocols, but his concerns were ignored. When questioned after the incident, he stated that he was preparing his gear when the sudden order to open the door came through his headset. Before he could respond, the detainee had already been pushed out. The shock and disbelief that followed were captured in his body cam footage, showing him frozen, staring at the open sky as the helicopter banked sharply to the right. A closer look at the police department's aerial division revealed a disturbing trend: budget cuts, minimal training refreshers, and over-reliance on multitasking units. Many officers assigned to aviation roles weren't certified for mid-air deployment missions, and some hadn't undergone safety retraining in over 2 years. This lack of specialized readiness meant that during high-stress operations, mistakes could and did turn deadly. Yet amid all this outrage, some tried to contextualize the failure. Tactical experts explained that airborne law enforcement requires seamless coordination between ground and air teams, something often compromised when split-second decisions are made under duress. The pilot has to balance aerodynamics, terrain awareness, and communication with multiple command units, all while ensuring no one on board becomes a liability. But none of these challenges justified the outcome that day. The design flaw of using a mixed-purpose helicopter highlighted another key performance issue: visibility and internal layout. The cabin's tight spacing and obstructed view can cause confusion about positioning, especially when multiple personnel and a detainee are on board. Unlike cargo helicopters with open bays and harness points, law enforcement choppers prioritize agility over space. That meant the officers likely had only seconds to assess who was standing near the door, relying on shouting over roaring engines instead of visual confirmation. Still, that doesn't explain why a restrained woman was placed anywhere near an open hatch during an active pursuit. The aftermath extended beyond just disciplinary actions. Lawsuits were filed, investigations launched, and civil rights groups demanded criminal charges. The police department eventually released a heavily redacted statement acknowledging grave procedural errors and confirming that 2 officers had been placed on unpaid suspension. The pilot was reassigned pending further review, but for the public it wasn't enough. The phrase "armed officer don't need parachute" became a haunting slogan, a reminder of how a human life was reduced to a punchline born of negligence and confusion. Analysts later pointed out the broader implications: the militarization of police forces and their growing use of combat-grade equipment without adequate oversight. The blending of military-style tactics with civilian law enforcement operations creates dangerous scenarios where restraint and responsibility are easily overshadowed by aggression and haste. In this case, the helicopter was being operated more like a war machine than a civilian policing tool, and that mindset had fatal consequences. Experts in human factors, the study of how people interact with machines under stress, highlighted how sensory overload can distort perception in flight. The roar of the rotor, radio chatter, vibration, and adrenaline surge can all impair communication. Still, proper training is designed to prevent those distortions from leading to fatal outcomes. That's why every police department with an aviation division maintains strict operating manuals, checklists, and verification codes. Bypassing those safeguards, even for a second, can unleash chaos. The woman's identity was later confirmed, and her family described her as soft-spoken, kind, and deeply religious. She wasn't a violent criminal as initially claimed. Her only connection to the suspect was circumstantial. She had been driving a vehicle linked to one of the crimes. Her death became a symbol, not just of procedural failure, but of how easily humanity can vanish in the machinery of law enforcement. In reviewing this tragic event, what stands out isn't just the technical or operational failure, it's the collapse of empathy under pressure. The helicopter, with all its engineering precision and tactical capability, became a stage for human error and moral blindness. Its design, meant for precision and safety, was overshadowed by flawed decision-making. The machine performed exactly as designed. It was the people who didn't. The blades spun, the controls responded. The instruments displayed perfectly, but no amount of aeronautical perfection could save the life that was thrown from its side. As the investigation closed, new policies were introduced mandating that detainees never be placed in airborne vehicles during active pursuit missions. Police departments began reevaluating their use of aerial tactics altogether, some even grounding similar helicopters until new safety mechanisms could be installed. The tragic irony is that it took one horrifying mistake to expose systemic neglect. The phrase "don't need parachute" became more than just words. It became a warning of what happens when training, ethics, and technology fall out of sync.